Hey there, welcome back. Today we are going to be painting this landscape featuring this large tree on an early spring set. We are going to be using light washes on the background, and then we'll work with light and shadows to make the tree pop on the setting. So grab your brush, let's paint this beautiful scene together. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to catch more on tutorials like this. Let's get started. Here is a sketch of the tree that I have done on my sketchbook on the very end of winter, almost the beginning of spring. And I wanted to paint in watercolor on an early spring setting landscape. Initially I was planning to paint use one color, monochromatic scheme. So I tried out with indigo, then Payne's gray, but then I decided to go on full color. So I opted for a light muted color scheme, and I add some low mountain hills on the background with the sunset showing a little bit, and then I put some simple bushes on the foreground just to create a little bit of depth to the landscape. As this is a very early spring tree, it's not going to have any leaves on it. It's just coming out those little tips of the leaves, the little points start to show off. So now, in order for me to transfer the sketch from my sketchbook to the watercolor paper, I use a tracing paper, and then with my lighting board I transfer to the watercolor paper as I did on my previous tutorial. So I use the same technique. And here is the sketch already done in a very light pencil, so it doesn't show when we are painting. So now let's talk about the paints and brushes. So the color scheme that I have chosen is, like I said, muted light colors. So I chose indigo for the sky, then I have sepia for the tree trunks, perylene green for the grounds, yellow ochre for the sunset, and I created this shadow mix using French ultramarine, alizarin crimson, and yellow ochre, which is basically the mix for Payne's gray. But I have Payne's gray here that I'm gonna be using to mix with sepia to make darker shades of the brown for the tree trunks, which is going to show the shadows, the parts that's going to be in the shadow. I also have titanium white for some highlights. Okay, so now for the brushes, I'm gonna start with this, which is a filbert size 10. I'll be using most for the sky and some of the background and foreground. And I also gonna be using these texture brushes for the tree. Like I said, there's no leaves, but it's going to show a little bit of points that suggest that the leaves are coming out. And so I'm gonna be using these two brushes. One is the rotary tree and the other is the tree and texture, both from Rosemary Co. Then I'm gonna use this rigger to create the fine branches of the tree, because I don't want to have too much control, so a rigger is the best to create this natural look on the branches. This is a size 2 rigger. And the last one is the silver silk. It's a round size 6 and has a very point tip as well, and it's good to create some details. And also the belly of this brush holds a fair amount of water and paint, so it's good for me for the foreground, for the bushes on the foreground. So that's all the materials. Now let's get started. I started by wetting the paper, but before I started wetting, I attached the paper to the board only on the top and bottom of the paper. I made the mistake not putting tape on the side as well, and as the paper started to warp a bit, I'll add the taper later on. So after wetting the paper, I began by adding the yellow, using the yellow ochre to capture the essence of the sunset. Then I introduced a light wash of blue. I didn't want to darken the sky too much because I wanted the tree to stand out. After all, the tree is the main focus on the scene, and I wanted to really shine against the backdrop. Working wet on wet allows to have a smooth transition between the colors and blending well without creating hard edges. So here I'm working with the perylene green to create the mountains in the background, a light shade for the far hills because all the subjects that are further from us, it appears lighter, and the closer to us, the darker it will be. In this case, I add some darker values to create depth to the scene. Next, I dumped the paper at the bottom, which will serve as the foreground. However, instead of painting the foreground right away, I allowed the paper to dry a bit. During this time, I applied paint to the trunk of the tree, letting it bleed into the ground to create a natural connection between the tree and the earth. This technique ensures that the tree doesn't appear like be floating in the sand. The next step is to continue filling the branches with paint in a light shade, working on all thicker branches, but not the twigs, because we are going to be using another brush for those twigs. I start with a light value of the sepia and build up the layers into darker values, especially for the parts that are in shadow. Here I start work on the ground using sepia and perylene green, while still a bit damp the paper, because I wanted to create a smooth blending without harder edges. Then I added more color for some parts close to the tree. I didn't want to darken too much the ground because I still needed to add the cast shadow of the tree on the ground. If the ground is too dark, it's difficult to create a shadow on top of a dark layer. I didn't mention before, but the light source, which is the sun, is coming from the right side of the picture. Therefore, almost everything on the left, we have some kind of shadow. Here we have to pay attention to the fact that that is a sunset and the sun is almost down, so the light will be hitting some of the bottom of the branches on the right side, but not all of them. From here you see me painting all the branches and building up the layers to create the shadows, so I'll speed up the process to go faster until you get to the part where I start with the twigs. Now, using the rigger size 2, I add fine twig works to the branches to create those thin twigs. When you use a rigger for those twigs, it gives a natural look because you have less control of what you are doing. Try to hold the brush at the end of the handle and stand up instead of sitting to give your arm free movement. The result will be much better when you don't try to follow the exact sketch line work, because I did the sketch of the twigs because I wanted to know where, more or less, to know where I would put them. But as I did in a very light pencil work, it will not show off much if I don't follow the exact lines with the paint on top. So try to keep that in mind when you are doing your sketch and do in a very light pencil work. To create the new leaves starting to grow, we are going to use the stippling technique. Use either a tree and texture brush like the one I'm using, or a size 6 brush with the bristles played out. Tap the brush using a dry technique. If you're using a sketch or a picture as a reference, go back to your image and see where and how much of the stippling you have to add to create the most natural look. Work around the whole tree to create a cohesive look. Now, going back to the rigger with just a little paint, and with the tip of the brush, start tapping the brush to the paper, varying the pressure to create light and dark feathery marks. At this point, you can also add a few more twigs to fill out the gaps that were left in the first round. Now here we are going to add glazing to the trunk to darken it a bit more. So we apply water using the filbert brush, and then I use the size 6 to apply the paint, emphasizing the shadow side of the tree. Now I move on to the foreground to add the bushes, first with a light shade of green. So I create a light very light bit of bushes on both sides of the image, and I leave the center open to indicate a pathway that leads to the tree. Then I start building the bushes with a darker shade of green. Then with the glazing technique again, I build up the ground with a bit more of the green paint, and then I splatter some of the green to the foreground to create texture. Using the shadow mix, which is 50% French ultramarine, 40% yellow ochre, and 10% alizarin crimson, I add the shadow of the tree to the ground, starting light at first and then building up. When painting trees, it's always a good idea to add a fence because it will add scale to your picture, so we can visually see how tall or short your tree is based on the fence. I painted these fence posts using a mix of sepia and Payne's gray. Then I added some tiny grasses at the base of those posts on the fence, just to give a little bit of more texture to the image. Continue with the grasses. I added a few in the foreground using the green in a darker value, which is the creamy consistency on a Tito butter value scale. Now is the time to paint the little figure in my painting. Don't worry much about this little person. You can even omit if you prefer. I know how intimidating it is to paint people. The person doesn't need to have any details at all. I have used the shadow mix for the trousers and the Payne's gray for the hair and t-shirt. Here I add some titanium white for highlights on the fence posts and some on the grasses on the foreground. Now, in the last step of this painting, I work with darker brown for the shadows on the trunk using the sepia and Payne's gray mix. Then I finish off by splattering some of this dark mix to give some texture to the paint and also create a little bit of noisy. So that's it, we get to the end. Thank you so much for being here, for watching all the way to the end. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned and receive notification about more tutorials and art inspiration. So until next time, keep painting and don't forget to enjoy the process. See you. Bye for now.